So, what's the problem? Why do we need such a database thing? Well, up to this point in the course, when we stored data permanently, we always stored it in files. We simply wrote data into a file, and when we needed that data, we read it from that file. That's what we did before. We write data to a file, we fetch data from a file. And then we might filter that fetched data for a specific ID, for example, as we did it here for restaurants, where we then went through all the fetched restaurants to get a specific restaurant, but we always interacted with the file system just like that. Now, whilst that worked, it's not great, because when we create data and we always replace the entire content of a file with the new data, or when we read data and we then always read the entire file content just to then loop through it and find a specific element. Or if we might want to update or delete data, and for that we also read the entire content to then find the element we want to update or delete, then update the entire data and write it back. If we always do it like this, then this is pretty inefficient, because we always overwrite everything, we always read everything, and that of course works for very simple demo projects and websites, but if our website grows and we have more and more data, that will simply lead to performance issues and our code will do unnecessarily much work. As a side note, the operations we see here, creating, reading, updating, and deleting, are very common and therefore commonly referred to as CRUD operations. And you will see them over and over again throughout the course, and especially also throughout the next sections, which are about databases. But back to this problem here. It's pretty inefficient if we always work with all the data. And it's not just inefficient because we work with too much data, because we could try to do that more efficiently. When working with files as we did it here, we don't have to read the entire file. We don't have to write the entire file. Node.js and other programming languages give us tools that would allow us to read parts of a file or write to parts of a file. So we could optimize that. But as I said, it's not just the inefficiency in our bulk operations that we have at the moment, but instead, in addition, we can simply run into scalability issues as our data size grows, as we have more and more data. And if we have more and more requests coming into our server, we can also run into issues because we can have concurrent file access, where because of 10 incoming requests, we try to write to exactly the same file 10 times at the same point of time. So we could have multiple read and or write operations targeting the same file at the exact same point of time, and that could cause us big issues where reading then fails or writing fails, or we accidentally overwrite data from another request because we have two requests coming in at the same point of time. And in addition, we also might overwhelm our computer, our system as a whole, or at least the file system if we have too many concurrent read and write operations. So as our website grows and handles more and more visitors, we can face more and more issues if we store and retrieve data as we did it up to this point. Therefore, that was great for getting started with backend development, but it's typically not how you would store and fetch your data in real websites. And that's where databases help us. That's why databases are super important and part of basically any website you're building. Because database management systems, or DBMS, are simply software systems, so software you install on some system, you could say, that are optimized for data storage tasks. Under the hood, they will still store data in files at some point, but they do it in a way more efficient way, taking away all the heavy lifting of managing file access and concurrent read and write access from you, and allowing you to just work with your data without having to worry about how that data is then written to a file or how it's fetched from a file. So database management systems help us by optimizing read-write access, by taking away that pain from us. They help us by simply optimizing how data is stored and retrieved to make that more efficient and don't overwhelm our file system. And they optimize data querying by helping us with rich queries, by giving us specific query languages that allow us to find specific pieces of data in a large chunk of data with ease, so that we have to write less code for the same or even more work that we want to do in our website. And therefore, database management systems are a must-use if you have a website where you are storing and fetching data. And it turns out that many websites do that in some form. Now, there are many database management systems you could use. There are many providers, free ones and paid ones, but there are two main kind of systems in the end that you can use. And then for each system, you'll have plenty of possible database software solutions to choose from, but there are two main kinds of databases in the end. And that would be relational database management systems, also often called SQL databases. And SQL often is translated with structured query language, which means that SQL stands for structured query language. And you can use that, but actually it's not coming from that. It's not an acronym for that. Instead, SQL originally was called SQL written like this, and then it was just shortened to SQL, basically. Now, that's just a side note. It is a programming language, kind of, that is built for getting data from databases and storing data in databases, or in general, a language for talking to such relational database management systems. That's what SQL is, and that is what we will learn throughout this course. But besides such SQL databases that use this programming language for fetching data and writing data, we also have non-relational database management systems, which typically are called NoSQL databases, because there you store your data differently, it's structured differently inside of the database, and you don't use the SQL language for fetching your data or for writing your data, but instead different query languages. And these are the two main kinds of systems, and in the next lectures I'll walk you through the basics of these two systems, and I'll give you a first comparison of these two systems. In this course, however, we'll then have entire sections for both systems so that you get a detailed introduction to both systems, so that you can then also use either system for your upcoming websites.